Logic is the number one killer of great creative writing. And I know what the logic bros are thinking right now. How can you write a story without logic, Ian? Yes, we need logic at its base level to function in reality and write stories. But the obsession on technique, on craft, on writing manuals, on writing videos, on trying to finesse, versify, and micro every single sentence and make every single thing perfect is ruining our writing community. And the MIC-MFA factories, the Kindle graveyard, the sci-fi nerds, the fantasy nerds, all the people writing genre that aren't trying to write high-level literary stuff are creating a logical wasteland. And Lorca, one of the best 20th century poets, and there he is right there. If you haven't read him, you are doing yourself a disservice, said this: "But intelligence is often the enemy of writing because it limits too much, and it elevates the poet to a sharp-edged throne where he forgets that ants could eat him or that a great arsenic lobster could fall suddenly on his head." And you cannot perform necromancy on your writing. Let me tell you that again. You cannot perform necromancy on your writing, because if you do not capture the vibe, if you do not understand how to make unconscious leaps from the conscious to the unconscious and create that spark which creates metaphor and beauty and difference and separation for your work, and create ideas that are inherently illogical and don't necessarily fit into the puzzle of the story but have a deeper symbolic meaning, then no one can help you. You can't give it to the best. You could give it to the best editor in the country and they couldn't help you. And what's so deceptive about all of this is that with logic, with pure mind, with pure force, you can write a good novel. You can get people to clap their hands and be like, yeah, that was really good. But you will never get on a bookshelf of someone who actually cares about literature. Because if I was here to see a logical circle jerk, I could go read philosophy. I could go in many other different fields if that's what I wanted. And let me give you guys a potent example really fast. I talk about David Foster Wallace on this channel all the time. Maybe many of you guys don't like him, but he was a logical prodigy. He was accepted into Harvard's PhD program for philosophy, which only at the time 6 people were accepted into every single year. He was considered a prodigy, someone who was going to, be a big thing in philosophy. But that ripped at his soul, and he decided that he had to write fiction. He had to exist in the world of metaphor. And there are countless other authors behind me who have a very similar story. They have all that logic within them, but they decided to move away from that and actually start engaging in art and not doubling down on their strengths. And so if you write something that's magical, that's crazy, that's a little bit over the top, there are editors out there who can help you. I know we have this perception, because we've all been burned on Kindle before, that the dude that creates his own cover and doesn't have an editor because he thinks that he's an editor, that's what over-the-top writing looks like. But I've read first drafts of authors that, or I should say, I don't know what draft it was, but an early drafts of authors who are writing over the top with these beautiful metaphors. And if they got that in the hands of someone talented and were willing to pay, or they got signed to a deal, they would make it to my bookshelf. I would hear about their work, like, oh my God, you see what this guy's doing? Oh, that was crazy. And so Rilke, another one of the best 20th century poets, in his book, Letters to a Young Poet, talks about, first and foremost, that you have to discover your inward self before you can write about anything, that your mind and logic mean nothing, and that you have to develop over years, if not decades, a relationship with yourself and what's happening in the moment, and that you need to be writing about that. You need to be existing in solitude and writing about nature and objects and your own emotions, and let your own language evolve from that. And if you can do that, something magical happens, because something that the logic pros don't realize is that they are the closed-minded ones. Yes, they can rationalize and win every argument and just keep one-upping the chain with their intellect, but they are viewing reality through a single frame, which is biased, even if they think it isn't biased. But what real poets know, what real artists know, is that it isn't through logic, but through emotion and contemplation, without rationalization. That's when you can actually start seeing reality for what it is. And that's where real art starts taking place. This is where crazy worlds and crazy ideas and these vibes start to stem from. It's from people who see reality differently. And what's funny is when you kind of put them all together, they're seeing reality the same way, because they are actually seeing reality without the blinders on. They've transcended their own personal biases and then moved past their own logic and are seeing an accurate perception of reality, even just for a moment. And that's why we feel the truth of their works, even if they are over the top. And speaking of logic, I am a big believer in the alpha omega relationship between the writer and the reader. There are so many people out there I'm just writing to write. I'm just writing for one. I'm just writing a novel that I would like to read. They have that mentality. They don't think about the reader at all. They don't think that what they are doing is a message to someone else who has to sit down and read it for 5 hours and dump a bunch of mental energy in it. And in my opinion, writers like that are just total narcissists and very rarely make it to a shelf. But for everyone else, you should be viewing your relationship as this eternal struggle between you and the reader, and you are trying to psychically connect with them, not logically. It's not like a business 101 meeting where you're like, okay, let's figure out our avatar. Who's our avatar for this novel? It's not like that. But it's rather you feel, you intuit, you connect to the creative ether or some deep part of yourself and can get into this idea or this feeling of this is what my transcendent reader wants. And that whole experience cannot be done with logic, because if it's done with logic, then you have a checklist. You don't realize that a great arsenic lobster could fall on your head at any time, because they're one of the highest ideals, especially as Americans, for how we perceive art is inventiveness. If you look at Infinite Jest, it is inventive. If you look at Cormac McCarthy novels, he has supernatural entities in almost every single one of his novels, or he's writing in a very postmodern framing. He's doing inventive stuff. Gravity's Rainbow. I mean, I could look at the shelf behind me, and many of the works that we call great, especially from the 20th century, have so many illogical and bizarre elements in them, but they work. How does Pynchon connect the Kabbalah and Rilke and the Illuminati and all these other things into one novel? Even like Toni Morrison, Margaret Atwood, Louise Edrich, like female authors who maybe people could say write more straightforward novels, literary fiction novels, have supernatural stuff happening in all their novels too. Bits of magic, bits of like, wait, what's happening here? This goes back to Shakespeare, the ghost in Hamlet, the ghost in Macbeth. Is Macbeth and Hamlet a science fiction or a supernatural novel? No, but it just works. People don't question it. She's like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I get the point. And so there are now more opportunities. You don't have to put a ghost in your novel, but now there are more opportunities than ever for you to rattle the cage, not to just rattle the cage, but because you're actually exploring your own soul. But unfortunately, because of this technological society we are living in, we are 100% logic, because while engaging with technological devices, we exist in the realm. The medium is the message, and they are programmed with logic, have a path, most of the time have apps with people who have vacation homes who sit around and think all day how to keep you longer on this app, aka YouTube. It's all a logical experience connected to your biology. And many of us have been exposed to this for our entire life. And so we haven't learned how to live in metaphor, how to live in adventure, how to live in nature. Because the best way to cultivate metaphor, the best way to cultivate a lot of these things is solitude, silence, time out in nature, religious contemplation for whatever sect or religion you are in. That's how you start to move into this world. Also through life experiences, through sexual awakenings, through awakenings through drugs, through all of that, Once again, when I look at the bookshelf behind me, many of those individuals, especially in the 20th century, had sexual awakenings and psychedelic awakenings or near-death awakenings or awakenings of that sort that took their art to the next level. Or they had some insane amount of trauma in their life or just, genetic mental illness. So what are you bringing to the table? And it's an important thing to ask, because if you don't have a lot of the same attributes that, the data set behind me has, then you're most likely not going to be successful. And it's very harsh to say that, but it's important for life. Like, why wouldn't you want to go spend more time alone? Why wouldn't you want to have one of the various forms of awakening? That sounds great. And so all of those things transcend logic. If you go do an ayahuasca ceremony for 3 days, the answers that you are going to get are not going to be the same answers if you sat down at your table for 3 days and got a yellow legal pad and tried to figure out your life. Because when you live in a logical framing, you go A to B. What's funny is that for a long time, I tried to make this channel better, like logically. I tried to do everything I was supposed to do to make it, to get over the hump. I made 200 videos and only got 100 subscribers. And I was like, dude, what am I doing wrong? And it wasn't until I let go and started viewing the situation subjectively from different angles that suddenly my channel blew up. And once I started doing that, it took like a month. And when I look back at every other experience in my life, and I would ask you to do the same, when I think of my greatest wins in life, They were when I was in my own flow, when I was connected to what I was really supposed to be doing and not viewing life logically. And every single one of my failures, you guys, like my top 5 biggest failures, were when I was viewing everything too logically. For instance, one of them was back in high school. So my junior year in high school, I ran a 16-minute 5K, which is pretty good. And then you would expect as a senior that I would do better. But I ran that 16-minute 5K after having mono, super bad mono that I got from making out with a girl for like a month. But the way I was viewing running at that time, because I was a little existentialist atheist, was it was all just scientific, that every single part of my day, every minute was planned out. I read all the guides on running. I read Arthur Lydiard and everyone and figured out the perfect training protocol, ate the right amount of macros, all the calories were right. But all that led to me getting mono, which wrecked my immune system for 2 years. So I did run really fast my junior year, and that was like me giving everything I had. But for the next year, I got sick like every single month really bad. And then I got slower the next year, and me trying to get a scholarship or, hit the times I wanted to just melted away. And that's like not like my biggest life failure. Like, oh, boo-hoo. But that's when I was the most logical. And every other thing that has led to failure in my life has been connected to logic. I could say the same thing for my writing too. That when I was at my worst in writing was when I was just trying to get published, just trying to do something, just trying to push, not actually cultivating and sitting. And so I don't know if you guys resonate with this message, but this is something that I believe in. And that is a key component to the literary renaissance, that we don't need more logic bros out there. We don't need perfect novels that are intense and have every little detail mapped out perfectly. I would rather have insane novels because those are what really transform you in the long run. And so thank you guys for being here. If you guys want to read my writing, be a part of my community, I have free and paid stuff over on my Substack. I would love to see you guys over there. Substack.com is where the literary renaissance is happening. Hope you guys have a good Wednesday.